Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to some of you. My name is Max Elder, and I am a research director here at the Institute for the Future in our Food Futures Lab. And I will be facilitating this Foresight Talks session today. I'm so excited actually to do this for many reasons, one of which is that Dimitri and I have interacted a few times before, and he's a wealth of insightful information about foresight, about food. So I can't wait to hear what he has to say today. Our Foresight Talks, I'll get into a little bit and run through the agenda for the day. Before I do so, I just want to say thank you all for joining. This is a really, really wonderful program that the Institute has started to roll out this year. And Dimitri, thank you in advance for your time, your insights, your knowledge, your expertise.
You're welcome.
Dimitri runs Global Consumer Insight and Market Intelligence for Nestle, and this is a really unique and wonderful opportunity to hear a little bit about how someone inside one of the world's largest food companies thinks about the future and how he and his team track trends and come up with new forecasts to drive business opportunities. Before we get into the conversation, I just want to talk a little bit about Foresight Talks. This is a new program that our Learn team has been developing, really trying to grow foresight capabilities across our global community through creating new types of enhanced connections, mutual learning opportunities, and really better awareness of all of the community's needs. We, as many of you probably know, have been doing a lot in our education program, trying to upskill different people around the world, across industries, across geographies in foresight. And we've realized that there is a gap in the broader community, and we're trying to help create a platform that enables that sort of shared learning and mutual connection so that we can all help create better futures. So thank you all for participating in this. Please let us know what you think, whether these are valuable, and I'll have my email at the end of this. Please reach out. We're trying to build a global community of foresight practitioners, and this is one of many attempts at trying to create that really robust foresight community. I also just want to share quickly some resources to help you all do your own futures thinking in your work and in your lives. One is that we at the Institute host foresight practitioner trainings. Dimitri went through one of them, so I'm sure he has lots of ideas on how they work, and he can maybe talk a little bit about his experience there. We do them both in Palo Alto and around the world, and you'll see some upcoming dates for our 3-day trainings. These are really nuts and bolts immersions in our foresight methodologies. Really wonderful, wonderful. Some of my favorite things that I do at the Institute is help facilitate these trainings. Amazing people from around the world like Dimitri come and spend 3 days together to really dive deep into strategic foresight. And we've also recently launched a new design futures course, which really focuses on not just how to do strategic foresight, but how to do immersive, experiential foresight, really at the intersection of design futures and foresight. We've our first training completely sold out. We've opened up another one in April of 2020, and there's much more information about all these trainings on our website. Finally, one of the things that I'm most excited about is that IFTF is developing an online course on Coursera, and this will be the world's first set of massively open online courses that are grounded in futures thinking. My colleague Jane McGonigal has been leading the development of them, and really everyone across the Institute for the Future has been involved. We're really hoping that this creates a platform to expand futures thinking beyond these walls, and really to around the world, and democratizes it in a way that I don't think it's ever really been done before. So this is a really ambitious project, and we're so thrilled to have Coursera's partnership on it. We'll send some more information to you all once it's fully launched. And we have these Foresight Talks. We do them quite regularly, and there are 2 upcoming Foresight Talks that I just want to get on your radar. I'll remind everyone at the end of this conversation. But quickly, the first is Jane McGonigal, a research director at the Institute for the Future, is going to host a Foresight Talks to walk through our Futures Thinking online courses on Coursera, and that's on November 14th. That'll be a really wonderful way if anyone's interested in exploring the course or if anyone wants to try to roll out the course in their company or for their organization or their community group. It doesn't need to be just professional. This is also a wonderful approach to your personal life and familial life. So tune in to hear Jane talk about our training. And then what I'm really excited about is a conversation on December 11th with someone at the U.S. Forest Service Research and Development Department. The U.S. Forest Service actually has an internal futurist, and they've done wonderful and provocative work on topics such as the future of forests in the United States. So we're going to host a conversation to see how governments can embed foresight into their work, and interesting in domains that maybe we often don't think of. So thinking about how to embed foresight into how we manage forests globally, I think is a really interesting and provocative conversation. And I'm sure that we'll be talking about what those insights and learnings might mean for other domains as well. So put those on your calendars. And without further ado, I'm just going to jump into the agenda for today. Like I said, I'm so excited to hear Dimitri talk a little bit about his work at Nestle and his team. He has a little micro presentation that he's going to give. So I will have Dimitri introduce himself. He'll start sharing his screen and walk through a couple of slides of his work around the world. I will then follow up with a couple of questions, but I'm sure you all are much more interested in your questions, not mine. So after I ask one or two follow-up questions, we will open up the conversation. And the way to do that is, I see many of you are already conversing in the chat box. You all can talk and chat throughout this presentation there. There is also, you'll see a button in Zoom for Q&A. Please submit your questions that you'd like to ask Dimitri in the Q&A, and we will filter those through, and we will hopefully get to as many as we possibly can. I'm hoping that we can have about a good 25 minutes of questions from you all. We are recording this for you all to watch and to share, and for those who couldn't make it, they can watch this afterwards. So know that this is being recorded, and also know that you are all on mute. So have your breakfast, be loud, do whatever you need to do. We won't hear you. But also, if you ask a question, we won't hear you. So please submit questions through the Q&A button. Without, I guess, further ado, Dimitri, thank you again so much for joining us. I'm so excited to hear what you have to share with us all today. Could you share your screen and start to talk a little bit about who you are? I would love to hear a little bit before you jump into your presentation about how you ended up at Nestle doing this kind of work. Sure. And then I know you have a short presentation, and we'll follow up with some questions afterwards.
Very good. So hi, everyone. My name is Dimitri Garevtsov. I'm the Global Consumer Insight and Market Intelligence Manager at Nestle. And basically, so how I got to Nestle is a bit of an interesting route. I don't have a standard CV, which quite a few other people have. So I started by looking or researching animal behavior, and I was focusing on memory formation, and so I studied actually biology and ethology, which is behavior science, and looking at animal behavior and the impact of drugs on side effects in animals. And then I moved to the same effects on autistic children, and I worked for Novartis pharma industry for a few years. And after that, I moved actually to a Dutch company, which is called Noldus, and they are creating tools and systems and software, hardware to observe behavior. So I've always been into understanding interaction between objects or things and animals or humans. And my, let's say, the key things which I'm working on is usually non-verbal behavior more than verbal behavior. So what are the people doing more than what they are saying? While being in this company, I was a branch office manager for France, Belgium, and Switzerland. So I was developing the whole market there. And one of my key customers was Nestle. So I installed at Nestle several consumer research labs, which were facilities to observe consumer behaviors with cameras, software to analyze automatically or manually their behaviors. And so that was a natural jump at a certain point. So 10 years ago, I jumped to Nestle, and I worked for 4.5 years at the NRC, which is the Nestle Research Center, core research center in Lausanne. And then I moved to the food category 5 years ago. So I'm working now for the food category 5 years ago. Started really in consumer insight for product launches. So really understanding the ins and outs of the needs of consumers and tensions for concept development and product development, and then moving up and up to the role I have right now, which is a more strategic role, I would say. And so in the role I'm playing right now is really the idea is for me to understand globally, so worldwide, and we usually split the world in 3 main zones, but understand worldwide trends related to food and their impact on our strategy, both in terms of category strategy and in terms of brand strategies. So that's in a nutshell what I'm doing. The food category at Nestle is a 10 billion category, roughly, so, or even a bit more. So it's not a very small business. It's quite a significant business at Nestle. And so when you take decisions to move to certain directions within a 10 billion business, you want to be kind of pretty sure that of what you're doing before investing, because yeah, Nestle is quite large, quite big, and so on one side, we have some power and some force to move in directions. On the other side, it's also seen as a kind of a big, giant, slow enterprise. So we need also to predict the future early enough to be able to move these forces to the right directions. So yeah. And so now I'm going to focus a little bit more on how we sense the future. And I welcome all of you to the Future of Food at Nestle. That's how we call all the work we are doing around predicting or thinking about the future and the impact of this future to Nestle. First of all, one of the things which everybody knows, but which is really important for us is we see the food has exploded all over the place, and I'm sure that you all see that. It's something which we hear often when we hear talks and etc. It's exploding all over the place. So initially, we can see that as a threat, because basically you have so many players popping up and gaining market shares and inventing new things which we don't think about, etc. On the other hand, we can see all of these booming elements as really opportunities, opportunities to move to new categories, to new channels, and you have Amazon Fresh over there, to new ways of consumption from consumers. Street foods, for example, is moving into really new directions, entering in the homes of consumers, a blurring of the different channels from what you order online, eat at home, order outside, or go and shop, eat outside, and etc. All of that environment is changing quite fast. And my role, and basically when we talk to the markets, and I have to deal with roughly 90 to 100 different markets around the world. When I talk to the markets will all say, my market is super different to all the other ones. My consumers are very different to all the other ones. We need to nurture these local elements, which are so important, and I fully agree with them. My role is also at one point to try to understand where are the similarities, where are groups of consumers or cohorts of consumers going, and what is happening. So food is pop, food is there, it's all over the place, and what do we do with it? So my role then is, and together with colleagues in the same department, what we are doing is really to look into what are the trends, what is happening, and we have different ways to look at that. And I've just highlighted a few elements here. When I talk about trends, it's on one side, the food-related trends, so really dealing with cuisines, with ingredients, with products, and etc. But it's also all the other aspects which we are looking for. As an example, regional elements or labels, claims, what is happening also in terms of companies, so startups, all and regulation, obviously, which is impacting heavily what we are allowed, not allowed, so the frame in which we can work on. All of that is really shaping the way we are moving forward. And obviously, the most important, which you see on the top right corner here, our consumers, that's the most important element for us. So what we really want to understand is how our consumers living or organized and dealing with all these changes, all this all this world, and what is happening around us, the good elements, the positive elements which they are picking, the negative elements which they want to avoid or getting away from. And our role, or my role, is then to look into all these and then to try to make sense of that, and the most importantly, to lend it to really business opportunities. So tell me what you eat and I will tell you who you are. So that's what we try to understand, really what consumers are eating, and then to be able actually to create clusters of consumers, clusters of trends, clusters of elements, and then study these elements in a deep manner. So in the role I'm in, and together with my colleague, we try to focus on 3 different aspects to sense the future and to really focus on trends. The first one is trends per se, and I already said a few words around that. But basically what we want to do is really to deliver foresight, so thoughts about where the world is going in the future, um, and then understand the impact of these possible futures on our business. So that's the first aspect. And the different elements which we try to understand is obviously cuisines. So what is happening around the world in different cuisines, because cuisines are impacting the food the consumers are exposed to and eating, and both out of home and in home. Then ingredients, so individual components, superfoods, goji berries, and all of these elements which we see flying around. We try to understand them, and we try to understand them from an ingredients point of view, but also from a sourcing point of view. Is it sustainable, not sustainable? What is the whole value chain? And obviously also from a culinary point of view. So the taste, the texture, the integration with other elements, the how all of that works together. And we also try to understand the consumption habits of consumers. So how often do they eat at home? What do they eat? What kind of utensils are they using? And all of that across the world. And you can guess that a kitchen in Guatemala will look very different from a kitchen in Germany or in Malaysia or in Indonesia. And so while I say that, it also means that the things we are looking at may not have a direct connection to food, or may have a broader connection to food, but we understand that they might have an impact on food. As an example, we look at the size of kitchen in the world, because the size of kitchen means how much space I have to cook or to prepare stuff and etc. So that's also an important element. And so all of these elements we try to look for and to understand. Then the second aspect is landing these elements in a strategic framework. And here, that's probably the most difficult part. Scouting or looking for trends is quite easy with what we have today, all the information. Actually, what is difficult is to make a selection among all what we have available. There are so many reports, so many tools available to automatically gather data, that the amount of information you can get is very easy. Then landing that information, what we do is we create usually a framework in which we'll have several macro trend, then sub-trends and micro trend, to allow us to focus on the things which we feel are the most interesting for us. And I will explain in a second how we do that. And then also to be able to prioritize the trends we want to really focus on. And we do that in a rolling way to make sure that we don't live with the same trend over for several years, and then we end up understanding that it's not anymore interesting. So this strategic landing is very important. And the third aspect is all our network within and outside of Nestlé. So I have counterparts which do the same piece of work than I do in other Nestlé categories, in other markets within my category, and also in other entities outside of Nestlé. And we have very regular meetings and interactions to make sure that we stay connected with the outside world and with what is happening. And obviously, we have also networks of consumers, which we have a lot of interaction with. So our focus in all of that is to make sure that whatever trends we look for, and because we are Nestlé, we are a company which needs to make money, our key focus is how can we bring frequency and volume in the product we are creating to make sure that the consumers will go for them. So we are focusing on dishes which consumers are eating often. We are focusing on food which the consumer are eating often, and etc. We will hardly ever, even if we look for the trends on more niche elements, in the end, what we want is to land it in a business proposition which makes sense at a broad scale. We cannot develop things which will only suit a very minor number of consumers in only a few countries. We really need the scale aspect. So how we do that? Drop assumption, listen to signals, and frame actions. So we have an ecosystem of different tools which we are using, from early trend scouting, then to trends analysis. We have digital platforms which we are looking for. We have even also open innovation platforms, so with interaction with the external world, as I was saying. We have a scientific community looking at more the scientific and technological trends. We look also for innovation venture funds. So which are the venture capitals putting their bets and their money on which startups? So we have systems to scout all of that. And we have our network, as I was saying. And all of these insights help us to understand where are trends going, what are the things which are happening. And at one point, what we do with these elements is we set down and we generate scenarios or assumptions. We think that the world is going to go in that direction. And we have identified 4 major directions in which Nestlé overall wants to go. And this is available to the outside world. So it's around authentic flavors, authentic food. The second one is around healthy lifestyle, so healthy food. And the third one is around experiences. So really experiencing different types of foods, different types of cuisines, and etc. The last one, which we are working a lot at the moment on, is on sustainability elements, obviously. And so sustainability is key for us, and we are tracking also that. But we are tracking that in the frame of what we are doing within food. So I'm not dealing, for example, with the plastic elements as long as it's outside of the food environment. So I prefer to have a kind of holistic view. So I'm not the one who's going to look at technological improvements around individual plastic components. I'm more the one going to look for what are the consumers thinking about plastic? How are they evolving? What are the implications for the business, for each of our categories, for our brands? Where are our brands positioned around plastic, and etc. So that's the way we move forward. Then I was explaining that we try to land these elements into a strategic and business opportunity. And we look at 2 things. On one side, we look at the attractiveness, and on the other side, we look at the ability to win. So attractiveness is how relevant it is to consumers, to markets, so to specific geographies. What are the barriers which block us from rolling this trend out, or which blocks this trend from moving forward? So that can be also independent of Nestle. Overall, what are the things which block it? Is it more the consumers are not understanding because it's too scientific? Is it more a technological barrier at the moment? Is it more a willingness to go for it, or etc.? And ability to win will be more, what are the manifestations which we already see on the market? What is our Nestle ability to differentiate from competition? Do we have here things which we can put forward? And obviously, is it aligned with our strategy and our strategy at Nestle globally? So here we want to make sure that whatever we go for or we develop fits with our commitments, which Nestle has made, fits with our food strategy, and etc. So we look at these different elements, and we have a system or a grid to rank all the trends, or to give points to all the trends according to these different topics. And what we do with it is then we look at the score for each of the trend, but also where does the trend land in these different aspects or these different elements. And then what we want to focus on is the tipping point. And the tipping point is, when do we feel the trend is mature enough that it's interesting for Nestle to enter, but not mature too much that it became mainstream, or too many of our competitors already entered, and etc. And when I talk about competitors, it's not only the big players. It can be also small players, as I was explaining at the beginning of my talk. Small players move fast nowadays, can gain a market share quite fast. So we need to understand, and this tipping point is really moving or changing depending on the category, depending on the brand, depending on the trend. So we really need to focus on understanding these different elements, how they move between each other. So the maturity of consumers, the maturity of technology, the maturity of the fit to our Nestle strategy, etc. And with that grid and with that tool, we can understand, depending on the scenario we want to push forward, how is that tipping point moving? Is it something we need to really deal with today, right now, because otherwise, because the technology is ready, for example, or do we need to move it a little bit further down the road? And with that, it allows us to prioritize the different trends, but prioritize them based on our assets, based on the Nestle strategy, but also based on the consumer willingness. And my role actually is not to tell my strategic partner, we need to go there. It's more to initiate discussion. So I will tell them, okay, these are the different options which we see. This option is good if we do this and that. This other option is better if we do these other things. This third option, if we really want to push that technology forward, that's the best option. And then I leave it to them, or it's an interactive discussion between all of these people. So we really do, along the year, frequent workshops and group discussions to really think about the implication of that. And then the brand manager will say, oh, I want to push my brand forward, so we should go for that. But the technological person will say, no, the technology is not yet ready. If we do it right now, we will shoot in our own foot, because we will not be able to sell a proposition which is enough competitive to really bring, for example, the price to a reasonable level for us, and etc. So I bring the frame, and I look at these different people then confronting their views. And with that, we define then where do we want to go all together. So that's the way we go from strategy to execution. So when we have defined, to finalize, when we have defined what we want to go for and done the priorities, we do usually what I call a sizing and business opportunity. So within that frame of a trend, we look for what are our business opportunities. So where do we feel in terms of which consumer group, which technology are we going to use for which, etc. And with these elements, it allows us to go from the global trend, which we see, to our own business opportunity, and then to size them. And here we have different tools. So we use all kind of different tools to size the category, to size the frequency at which the consumers use or eat similar products, to size our technological advantage, and etc. And then eventually it brings up to a certain value, which we then use in order to understand, is it something we want to go for, or is it at the moment too small and then we prefer to wait, or is it something we don't want to go at all at the moment? So that's a little bit how we do that. And then we go to the execution, which is then a more standard approach: ideation, concept, prototyping, interaction with consumers, and then products development and product launches. Or product, when I talk product, it's product, services, apps, etc. So it can cover the whole range of things we can do. Overall, then, just as an example, a few pictures to show you that it's not something we do exclusively at the desk. It's also something we do in a very dynamic way, going out, experiencing cuisines. That's the nice part of my job. Being able to try a lot of different foods, discussing with our chefs. So we have a group of experienced chefs coming, really, so cooks, who expose us to different cuisines, tell us what are the possibilities, and etc. And then sharing with our networks to be able to go to real consumers, and with real consumers to be able to understand what are the tensions, what do they really want, bring that back within Nestlé, and then explore the different scenarios which we are doing. So that's about it. For me, I'd like to finish with a nice quote of Jamie Oliver. I'll give you a few seconds to read. I open the deck to any questions you would have.
Amazing. Thanks, Dimitri, so much. And I love the Jamie Oliver quote. There is certainly always something new and amazing to learn about food. We have a bunch of really great questions that are emerging, and I'll let people submit some more, and I'll just ask one right now, and then I'll turn to sharing some from those who are tuning in. And the question that I have, I'm really interested in your background in biology and ethology, and maybe to begin our questions back at the beginning. Your work at Nestle clearly is not just about studying behavior, although I feel like a lot of forecast work involves understanding shifts in how humans behave. But it also is likely about how to shape human behavior. And so I'm wondering, a lot of what we've just heard is very much about tracking, monitoring, understanding directions of change. And I want to know, to what extent is your work about keeping your ear to the ground and sensing and anticipating the future of food? And to what extent is your work really about shaping a different future of food? And how do you balance those two?
That's a very good question. Thanks to ask. The ambition would be obviously, or not the ambition. I think I feel that it's a bit utopic to think that we can shape a lot the future of consumers. So on one side, we are sensing a lot of information. The shaping the future, for me, goes more towards what are the products we can offer to consumers to answer attention. And that's the way I feel that if we are the first ones to be able to identify clearly what a major tension consumers have, be it in a very poor country where consumers have really difficulties in getting just a simple food on the plate, all the way to more mature or more advanced countries where they explore all kinds of different food from around the world. Our role is more to understand core tensions the consumers have, and then to try to solve them. And I perceive that if we manage to solve really strong tensions with consumers, then we can shape basically or orient the way they are going to change their behaviors. But that I don't feel that, and I don't know how we could basically create a new product, because it's all about food in the end. So we are creating products around food. It's not like inventing a new technology or digital technology or something which will give you a third arm and bringing something brand new. It's all about food. So on the other hand, if we manage really to create, and I can take an back in the days when Maggie created the cube changed the life of millions of people because it was fortified, and so because of this fortification in vitamins, in iron, and etc. A lot of consumers have changed drastically their behaviors and using the Maggi cube in their daily routine, which they were not doing, and even changing the way they are cooking, um, the way they are preparing the food, the number of times they are cooking per day, because they have that available. So I feel it goes more in that direction, understanding clearly and really deeply, and that requires a lot of work. The consumer tension, answering to that, and that changes the behavior. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that answer. I'm going to turn to some questions that have been submitted, and there's a cluster of questions that I think are quite interesting and worth exploring around this notion of a tipping point.
Yeah.
And so from what I'm reading from people, I think we would love to hear a little bit more about both the criteria that you determine when a sort of tipping point has been reached, what that threshold is and how you determine it. And then maybe a follow-up to this sort of initial question that I asked is, um, what role do you all think that you play in creating those tipping points?
Mm-hmm.
So certainly it's one thing to see all the dominoes and see that they're, oh my gosh, aligned and ready to be pushed. And then it's a totally other thing to figure out how and when you might push them to cascade the reaction. So how do you measure, track tipping points, and what are the signals that you all see that prove to you that a tipping point has been reached?
So first of all, I'll be very transparent. If only I had a precise and final answer about you were doing, first of all, I would not be there. I would have probably my own company. Second, Nestle would be in a better shape than it is right now. So we are doing very good in some aspect, but not so good in others. So we would be fantastic everywhere. So first of all, it's not a precise science. Sometimes it works, sometimes or often we fail, and that's also why although I'm dealing with very strategic element, I'm also part of R&D, because we fail often and we succeed rarely. So this science of identifying tipping points and basically bringing different curves together to understand where they merge and where we want to go is definitely not an exact science. And so that's the warning I wanted to give. Nonetheless, what we are doing is, first of all, we are looking at consumers. So we have a lot of tools to look at online social media discussions, which allow us to understand from just simple words, which we input in these systems, what is the amount of generated conversations around these elements. So that's one thing which we can track. And if that element goes higher than a certain points, then we move it to something we track more often, or we move it to the next level. So that could be one of the first levels. On the other hand, we also look, and we always try to balance these two, we also look at what's happening out of home. So we look at what's happening in restaurants, so high-end restaurants, but also main or limited service restaurants, full service restaurants, etc. Even small tapas bars. So we scout not only big chains, but we have also people who go on a regular basis and look what's happening in smaller places. We work with agencies who do that. And the idea here is to not only look from a consumer point of view, but look from the outside world, so the chefs who master the culinary expertise, and look at what are they bringing in. And if we see the same ingredients or the same technique or the same dishes popping up suddenly in different places around the world, it doesn't need to be at one place, it can be at different places, then it will trigger also ourselves to track more of that. Then we look at technologies, then we look at, and etc. So we have different indicators, and when the indicators reaches a certain level, then we look more closely, or we start bringing these different indicators together. So if suddenly I see a chef looking at a specific berry or a specific ingredient for quite some time, or I see several chefs doing that, I will input that same element into the other systems to see what's happening. Do we see it also elsewhere, or it has not yet reached a certain level, and why? Also, maybe it's a different term used in different places, etc. And then when we see these different elements reaching a certain level together at the same time, then that's where we start to have the discussion about business opportunity. And then the tipping point is about where are our competitors around the world. Are they also looking at that? What are the products which have been already launched? What are the number of startups which already have started really looking into that particular trend? Where is our technology, but also competitive technologies going forward in that direction? And then it's about bringing all these aspects together and having a discussion. So the tipping point is not something only a graph is giving, and then as soon as it's reached a certain level, I say, whoa, tipping point, and I take it. It's more about bringing these different elements to the table and saying, okay, this is the environment we see. Do you feel we should bring the tipping point forward because it will give a clearness day advantage? Or do we move that lever a little bit backwards? Or do we leave that lever completely out?
Mm-hmm.
And we do that discussion with each and individual trend, and also with each and individual early signal which we see starting to become more interesting for us.
Yeah.
So the tipping point is really very much a discussion around different stakeholders, and to take a decision based on the criteria I shared earlier. So these prioritization criteria. But so it's a lot of quantitative data which feed into a qualitative discussion in the end.
Yes, no, I love that. And that's such a great articulation of both the science and the art of sense making and foresight. So that's a wonderful answer. Let's talk a little bit about maybe one domain that we might be seeing reaching a tipping point. There were a lot of questions about meat alternatives on the Q&A chat. So how do you see the trend of plant-based foods or meat-free burgers? What do you think about impossible foods? All of these sort of, I hate to call them alternative proteins because
so
they're
that
not.
has already reached the tipping point quite some time ago. If you look at how the Nestle investments together with McDonald's and Burger King and etc. In the Incredible Burger, we have a full range of Garden Gourmets, the brand, food and etc. So the tipping point was, I would say, 3-4 years ago. That's where we started to initiate all our technological development, because as you can imagine, it's not within half a year that we can develop a full line in the factory and understand exactly where we want to go and etc. Sometimes we can go faster by doing co-manufacturing or merge and acquisition. In other cases, when we really want to develop a competitive advantage, that's where we really need to invest our time, money, and we really need to be early enough to identify that tipping point. So that tipping point went already quite some years ago, and it came from agriculture, I would say, where we identified already like 20 years ago that if we move forward in the same way, simply the number of field acres needed to feed the population with cows, that collapsed and collided very heavily, very drastically, very soon. And that's where we started to look for meat alternatives. And so I will not disclose too much information, but I can tell you that now meat alternatives or alternative proteins, that has gone from a micro trend 4, 5, or 10 years ago to a sub trend to now a macro trend. So we have it really at the high level. And now we look for very much more fine-grained details around subcomponents within there for the future. So is the future going for insects, or is the future going for fish alternative, which we see popping at the moment, or is the future going for other alternatives? So we are really now going even one level down. Is the future more technology, or more you see all these lab created meats, or is the future still being more natural products? And so we are exploring all these scenarios based on all the elements I explained to you earlier, to identify among all of them, beyond simple creating burger patties and really nice, by the way, we just won some competition against all the other burgers with our Incredibles burgers. So I think we can be quite proud there as being the most tasty and the most natural, the tastier burger among all the competitors at the moment. So we are going in the right direction with our trend scouting foresight, and with also understanding all the sensory elements which are required across all the different consumers. Because as you can imagine, you have consumers who want really something which mimics totally meat, but you have other consumers who don't want that at all. They are already flexitarian or vegetarian. They are not interested in something which is bleeding and looking like meat. They are interested in something which provides them with really good natural proteins. So, and that's only two split I told you. Our system is probably split in 15, 18 different types of subcomponents within that environment.
I love that. And it's a really helpful way of better understanding a tipping point when you actually put a historical example into context and understand how you saw that and how it's changed. I have a couple other
and maybe just to finish on that, the tipping point now, because meat alternative, the tipping point went past that. Now we are recreating 4, 5, or 6 sub tipping points. So now we understand that meat-free alternative, it will go that way. We are sure, and that will be the future. Now within that future, what are the different options we have? And we create new tipping points for these different futures. And we track them, and then we have again these discussions. Do we want to push that tipping point forward or backwards? So it's not something, the tipping point is done, we move on and we go for something else. It's always something which, like a tree, you know, where you start down there, and then you move to the next level evolves, you choose one route, which is this one, and that route then evolves into 5 new routes with 5 new tipping points. So you choose this one, and etc. So that's how we work on this constant flow.
It's a beautiful analogy that's really helpful, because so I guess we all just heard it here, Nestle, the future is meat-free. That tipping point has already happened. Then the question is the future based on recombinant protein synthesis? Is it crickets? Is
exactly
it protein?
So I would not say the future is meat-free. I would say the future is really good meat on a far less regular basis. So nurturing that, like caviar. So that would be, the meat will become really a more high-end, appreciated product in a far smaller quantity. But I still feel it will stay there, and I love meat. So, but we will really move towards a far more sustainable solutions.
So fair enough. I appreciate that nuance. You're absolutely right. I know we only have a few minutes left, and then we have a few concluding remarks. I want to ask you maybe one last question, and we have a bunch of questions that we'll just collect and we'll maybe share with you, Dimitri, to get your thoughts.
Yes, sure.
In fact, we can share with the group. But there was a really great question that grounds all of this work, and it's kind of a mashup of two. One is, I want to ask how you measure success and how you think of success, because so much of forecasting in general is looking out to possible futures and being comfortable being wrong a lot, because we're not trying to optimize for accuracy, at least the work that we do at the Institute. It's trying to be internally consistent, but provocative and insightful. And you can be wrong and be insightful in really interesting ways.
Yes.
So how do you measure success? And at the same time, there was a question really about just like, how do you keep on going? How do you keep your team and yourself motivated? Because the future is changing so quickly and we're often so wrong, and these systems are so complex and confusing. It's really hard to maintain this sort of urgent sense of optimism that at least we embody at the Institute, or maybe it's business growth and strategy. So how do you maintain a heavy level of motivation to do this important work? And then how do you measure your success in that?
Yeah. So for the how do we keep the team motivated, I think I could go here.
Yeah.
That would give the perfect answer. Uh, I don't think we really need to be motivated. Look at the world outside. Look at the possibilities. Look at the how evolutions, how it's evolving. There are so many directions we can scout, go. We can look for, from pure technological systems, virtual reality, all the way down to super interesting solution. I just heard not so long ago, a startup created a system where with a slingshot, you throw a GoPro camera in the air um, above a field, and they do that in South Africa somewhere, in very poor countries. They throw it, the data is automatically sent to a supercalculator, which provides back, just by throwing that webcam in the air, provides back information around what is the soil composed of, what type of crop they should grow, at which time, and then taking also into account trends. So it will tell these people, do you need to grow crops which are becoming trendy because it will grow also their businesses, and etc. So it goes in all the direction in so many ways that I mean, I don't need to keep the team excited. And because we are working in food at Nestle, I'm working on one day on, or 1 hour on pizza, the next hour on childo, the next hour on spice mix, the next hour on soup, the next one on bouillons, the next one on table sauces, ketchup, mayonnaise, the next, etc., etc. So it's a broad array of different possibilities. Which is super interesting and super exciting. I love my job. um, then for you, other question, which was more around how do we measure success? It's a really good one, because we always fight for that. It's not easy. On one side, Nestle being a big corporation, you need to have tangible objectives at the end of the year to measure what you have done, and etc., and how successful you were. And on the other side, I'm working in super foresight, so really way at the beginning of the whole product development, meaning that whatever I do may, for 200 billion reasons, not end up in a product. And all of that may not be because of me, may be because of so many things that it's difficult to understand. So on one side, we measure success still by looking at products on the markets. So that's one of the things, very tangible sales data, because that definitely impacts the way we predicted in the past, the way we predicted the future, which is today, where we successful. So we also look back at the data we used in the past. So that's one thing. On the other side, and I'm very grateful for that, we have quite some freedom to fail. So to be able to identify things which will not go forward. So success is, for example, more around when we generate a framework, has it been shared broadly within Nestle? Has it been used broadly strategically? So do all the people who can use the tools we create or the framework around trends, how many people are aware of it, using it? Is it really then supporting in the strategic discussions? Is it supporting the strategic outcome? So And it's very simple. If a category lead is organizing a workshop where they look at the pipeline, is the future of food trends part of the discussion or not? So, because the idea is we want to create a framework and to provide as much insights and information to as many people within Nestle. And if possible, that everybody uses the same frame so that we come to the same conclusion with the same data, and so that we move together in the same direction in the end.
Mm.
The work of the markets and at the zone level is more to look at the specificities of the markets, but then within the frame we set, so that we push the same forces forward.
Mm.
So that's part of where we measure success, is also around the network, as I was saying, around the strategy, and then around the trends themselves. So by also looking at competition, are they looking at the same things than us? So at our competitive advantage, I would say. So
Yeah.
here, did we manage to identify things before the others and move them forward to a certain level where we feel the others are not there yet?
I
So
love
these
this
kind of things.
notion.
Yeah.
I really love this notion of a clarity of direction and creating a community to move forward in that direction, being flexible in how that looks, but very clear on where you're going. Dimitri, this has been so wonderful. Thank you all for joining this conversation. I really, really, really appreciate it. I have shared both my email and Dimitri's email. I know that there was a lot of really good questions that unfortunately we just didn't have time to get to. We will be reviewing those. Please come to our future Foresight Talks webinars. We are doing this to build this community. It is for you all, not for us. So please take advantage of these talks, share them with your colleagues and your friends, sign up for them, and please reach out to us and let us know how we can make them more helpful and impactful and insightful for you all and your foresight practices. Dimitri,
And maybe if I have one thing, attend the IFTF training. I'm not paid by IFTF. I have participated to that training. For me, not only it provides really insightful tools and methods to think about scenario, but it really helped a lot with the community which is around IFTF. So we still have our WhatsApp group from the IFTF, and we still communicate every other day. So sharing trends, what's happening, etc. And because it's such a wide range of people from so many different part of the world and from so many different type of work. You were talking about the forest in the US, or that's exactly what it is, and it provides really super insightful information. So all of that together, that was it is a really interesting training. So go
amazing.
for it. Yeah.
Dimitri, I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you. Thank you all. We'll be sharing this recording. And Dimitri, thank you for your work on the future of food. We
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Thank you for hosting me.
Of course. Talk to you all soon.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Take care,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.